Overall, 2018 has been a fantastic year for me that has far exceeded my expectations. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're going to get controversial, and I'm going to give you my 10 picks for the most disappointing movies of 2018. So let's talk about it. Every single year, there's those movies that leave us feeling disappointed. They're not necessarily the worst movies of the year. In fact, some of these movies I gave a positive review to, but they're the movies that have the largest negative gap between what you expected and what the movie delivered. So if a movie was on your most anticipated list of the year and it turned out only kind of mixed, positive, or bad, it probably belongs on your most disappointing list. With that in mind, go ahead and share your picks down below in the comment section. What are the movies that disappointed you the most and why? Let's have a nice lively discussion. More so than any other video this year, I'm going to make you mad with this video because some of the movies that disappointed me the most are some of your top 10 favorites of the year. That's okay. Don't get triggered. I hate you. Why is it on this list? I'm unsubscribing. Let's not do that. Let's talk about why. Also, come back tomorrow for my worst of the year. Come back Saturday for my 10 best of the year. And if you're watching in the future, check out this playlist for all of my end of the year ranking videos. With that said, let's get started. Kicking things off at number 10 is Ralph Breaks the Internet. To be clear, I gave this movie a positive review. It has some fantastic sequences, especially the stuff with the princesses. It's never dull, but the original set the bar really high. I think it's one of the best Disney animated films in 25 years. I just love the concept, the setting, the characters are just delightful. So naturally, this was one of my most anticipated films of the fall. While the characters are as charming as ever, the movie overall felt like a pretty big misstep for me. By moving away from the retro video game setting to the internet in general, it provided them an opportunity for some cheap laughs, but a lot of the magic in general of the original film just seemed to be gone from the film. Likewise, a lot of the humor, since it was so meme and internet based, it felt outdated by the time the movie came out, including the title. Beyond that, the story structure just felt pretty bizarre to me. The main conflict of the beginning of the film is resolved by about 60% of the way through the movie, and then Ralph's character arc gets promoted to the main conflict of the film going into the third act, and I really didn't like how literal that got. So while it's still a film I would recommend, I'm sure I'm gonna buy it and rewatch it many times, it fell below that bar set by the original and where my expectations were at. My ninth biggest disappointment was Red Sparrow. From the initial looks of things, it looked like this movie might tide us over until we got that long rumored Black Widow movie. I of course love spy movies, and a movie about spy school seems like it has so much potential to be a lot of fun. Add to that, you've got a great cast and a great looking trailer. Well, that's not what it turned out to be. While there is a way that you could describe this movie in a way that would sound like many other spy films, the actual hook that distinguishes this film is that it focuses in on Soviet espionage. That is the use of sex as a tactical maneuver to gain information. Therefore, the spy training section of this film is about sexually desensitizing young women by forcing them to watch and perform sex acts. And prior to this section of the movie starting, there's an on-screen rape as well as multiple people murdered while engaging in sex acts. I can say this is the only movie this year that I turned off during my first viewing of it. Now, it's not a terribly made movie, it's just a movie made for a specific person. A person that has a high tolerance for watching sexual violence as well as women being sexually assaulted. That person is not me, so this movie was a massive disappointment. Number 8 is Peppermint. Now, most of you weren't disappointed by this movie because you assumed it was going to be awful. Maybe it's because I'm naive or because I'm the target audience for this film. I actually had it on my list of most anticipated of the fall. Now, 3 things drew me to this movie. The first one is that I wanted to see Jennifer Garner returning to shooting people in the face. The second one, it is from the director of Taken, and that's a fun, schlocky action movie. The third one, I was actually interested in seeing a female Punisher movie. Some people mentioned that as a criticism of the film. For me, that was the hook. Female Punisher. Now, the execution of all of this left much to be desired. Granted, for me, this is a very watchable film because it's a genre that I like, but it was a massive letdown. With these types of revenge movies, part of the hook is that the first act of the movie sets up a set of characters that you hate, that you want to watch die, and then the satisfaction of the second half of the movie is watching them die. This movie sets up those characters that you hate perfectly, and then glosses over their deaths. There's like 10 minutes in the middle of this movie that should have been the entire second half of the film, and the second half that we did get to this movie felt like the bad sequel to Peppermint. I didn't really expect that much from this movie, and it still fell well below my expectations. Coming in at number 7 is Skyscraper. This is another one where most of you probably weren't disappointed because you knew it was going to be bad. Once again, I'm the target audience, and so I put my blinders on. I enjoy The Rock. I enjoy a good throwback action movie, so I was thinking that this one could potentially be good. And the idea of a modern day Die Hard with The Rock, much like Jennifer Garner as the Punisher, sounded good to me. And then there's the movie itself, which for me probably wins the award for most mediocre movie of the year. It just feels like a totally safe, marketing department approved, studio approved, blockbuster stuff. It's the type of PG-13 action movie where a terrorist puts a gun to someone's head, the camera then pans away and you hear a gunshot. I mean, there's nothing memorable about this movie at all. I mean, it's not a total train wreck like some of the movies on this list. It just makes no impact on you at all. Number 6 is Venom. Now, I know a bunch of you loved this movie, but this is a project I was always highly skeptical of for the simple fact of the matter that Venom's origin in the comics, cartoons, and movies has always been tied to Spider-Man. And it's not a superficial connection. At the core of Venom and Eddie Brock's characters is Spider-Man. So making a standalone Venom movie seemed like a pretty cynical move on Sony's part, which called to mind such classics as Steel and Catwoman. But with the casting of Tom Hardy, I started to get a little bit interested, and then some of the trailers had some pretty cool little stuff in there, so I started to get kind of excited. But my feelings after seeing the movie were just as confused as they were before seeing the movie. The Venom action itself was pretty great. Tom Hardy gives a weird, quirky, fun performance, and I gotta say, I really enjoyed most of the interactions between Eddie and Venom themselves. And in that regards, this movie demonstrated it's possible to do Venom right on the big screen. But the storytelling, and tone are a total mess. There's massive lapses in the logic, in the timeline of the movie. Characters' motivations are very confused, and so it is just all over the place on a story and storytelling level. So while the movie isn't devoid of entertainment, it falls so far short of what it could have been as a movie overall. Bringing us into the top 5 is Ready Player One. Now, I know a bunch of you have this in your top 10 for the year, so this is an unpopular opinion. So I was a huge fan of the book, and Steven Spielberg is my favorite director of all time. So this movie was one of my top 5 most anticipated movies of the year. And I gave it a positive review, and I stand by that positive review. But compared to the book, the movie felt like a dumbed down Cliff Notes version of the story, targeting a much more superficial, nostalgic audience. Understandably, they couldn't directly translate the book to the screen. My issue isn't that they swapped out characters standing there playing 80s arcade games with street races. It's that they took these complex riddles and replaced them with dumb clues with answers like drive backwards. I'm not normally the person who's read the book first and plays the book was better card, but today I'm totally that guy. The book was better. All of the interesting world building and deep cut 80s references is replaced by mainstream 80s pop culture, cameos, and action sequences, so this one came in well below my expectations. Coming in at number 4 is the Cloverfield Paradox. The first 2 Cloverfield films were 2 of the most interesting releases of the last 10 years because of their weird marketing campaigns and the mystery surrounding the release itself. Also, both of them had an interesting take on the sci-fi genre that made them have a nice, unique voice. 10 Cloverfield Lane in particular was this great little paranoid sci-fi thriller that was actually written by Damien Chazelle. So naturally, this film was one of the runner-ups for my most anticipated films of 2018. In keeping with the previous 2 films, this one had a shocking release plan in which they put a trailer out during the Super Bowl announcing that the movie was available on Netflix as soon as the game was over with. But unfortunately, this time the marketing gimmick far outshadowed the film itself. The movie itself seemed to be a fairly generic sci-fi thriller in the vein of Sunshine or Event Horizon, except there was no rules to the weird occurrences happening inside of the film. Possibly worse, it felt like the Cloverfield tie-ins were added using reshoots rather than the actual intended purpose of the film itself. It seemed an awful lot like there were these little news broadcasts that were added to the film just so that there could be explanations for how this movie tied into the other films and how it gave answers for those films. The end result is a very sloppy sci-fi film and a very cheap way to force a movie into a better franchise. But before I give you my bottom three, remember to give me your picks down below. We're going to disagree. Let's not freak out on one another. Let's have a nice, lively, yet respectful conversation about our differences. Also, remember to come back tomorrow and Saturday for my worst and best of the year picks. And if you're watching in the future, check out this playlist up above. It has all of my end of the year videos. My third biggest disappointment of the year was Mile 22. Had I known this movie was coming out when I put together my most anticipated list of the year, this movie probably would have been on that list for three simple reasons. First off, I'm a big fan of the genre. Second, it stars Mark Wahlberg and, more importantly, Eco from The Raid. I've never actually heard his name pronounced. Third, it's directed by Peter Berg. On paper, this movie sounds amazing to me. Unfortunately, the movie delivered wastes all of the potential. The characters are unlikable, the dialogue is tedious, and the twists and turns are ridiculous. But the real killer here is that the action is atrocious. They hired one of the top martial arts performers working today to showcase his skills, and then they shot it like it was a crappy knockoff of a Bourne movie. It's like all of the worst trends in action sequences of the last 15 years. It's handheld shaky cam, shot in close-ups, and then choppily edited together with quick cuts. It's such a waste of what should have been an easy, solid action film. Peter Berg seems to be one of these major hit or miss directors. This one belongs right next to his classic Battleship. Our runner-up on the wall of disappointment goes to Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. Now, I've said it many times before that I love the Jurassic Park franchise. The original is just a classic film for me, and Jurassic World is what I consider a great Taco Bell film, and I'm a big fan of Chris Pratt. So naturally, this was one of my most anticipated movies of the film. So naturally, this was one of my most anticipated movies of the year, and then I saw the film. It's not that the movie's devoid of any positive aspects. I thought that this one best captured the thrills and scares of the original film. Chris Pratt's probably a little bit more fun in this film, and I can respect that they took a risk and tried something different. But 6 months later, this hasn't been a movie I've wanted to rewatch. I should have known something was wrong when they released this as an official poster. And a big part of why this movie doesn't work for me is that they replaced the fun of watching dinosaurs come alive with the horror and shock of watching them go extinct. I don't get much enjoyment out of watching the dinosaurs of the previous movies die a horrible death or become enslaved by military contractors. Beyond that, the movie introduces a plotline about cloning, which is really important for the mythology, that essentially goes nowhere. And then the final reveal about the evil scheme involving a gun's laser pointer is so insanely stupid, I can't believe it actually made it into a movie with this size of a budget. Now, there were some great things about the direction of the movie itself, but the story's direction was a total misfire for me. But the biggest disappointment of 2018 was the cancellation of Daredevil.
It's so hard to say goodbye.
A month later, still can't believe it. Oh yeah, we're supposed to be talking about movies. The real biggest disappointment of 2018 goes to The Predator. I'm a huge fan of the original film, so I was so excited when they announced that Shane Black was going to be writing and directing this film. From there, they announced a pretty great cast for the film, so naturally, this was my #1 pick for my most anticipated film of the year. And then rumors started to circulate about production troubles, a bad test screening, massive reshoots, a restructured ending, and even a #MeToo scandal. Still, I went into the movie hoping for a good time, and I can say I wasn't bored by the film, but it was a fascinating train wreck on a storytelling and editing level. It's hard to know if the original movie that they were making would have been better, but the second half of the movie that they delivered is basically incomprehensible. Apparently, they cut about 40 minutes out of the movie, including Edward James Olmos, Area 51, 2 additional Predators, about a week of time, and then they reshuffled the entire second half of the film. It just doesn't work. But it is one of the most interesting cinematic disasters released in a long time, so it has the dishonor of coming in at number 1. Remember to come back this weekend for my best and worst of the year list, and check out this playlist for all of my end of the year lists. Thank you so much for watching, and let's talk movies too much in 2019.